Imagine waking up to a knock on your door, only to find 3 police officers pointing semi-automatic rifles at your chest. Before you can even ask what is happening, you are thrown onto the cold pavement, zip-tied, and dragged into the back of a police cruiser. To the veteran detective leading the raid, you aren't a husband, a father, or an innocent citizen, you are a monster. They have the motive, they have the eyewitnesses, and they have an airtight timeline. But they don't have the one thing that changes everything, the silent witness sitting in a dusty electrical closet 3 blocks away, recording every single second. The morning sun had barely cleared the glass towers of downtown when Officer Marcus Vance adjusted his duty belt, feeling the familiar weight of his badge. Vance wasn't just any cop, he was a highly decorated, 15-year veteran of the force, renowned for his razor-sharp instincts. In his precinct, they called him the Bloodhound, because once Marcus locked onto a suspect, that suspect ended up behind bars. He didn't make mistakes. He believed the world was divided cleanly into those who protected the peace and those who shattered it. On this particular Tuesday, the peace had been shattered in the worst way possible. A high-end jewelry store on Oak Street had been hit. The owner, an elderly man beloved by the community, had been left tied up in the back room, his life's work cleared out of the safe in less than 4 minutes. The thief had bypassed the alarm, cut the telephone lines, and managed to vanish into the morning mist without leaving a single fingerprint behind. It was a professional, cold-blooded heist, and the pressure on the precinct to find the perpetrator was suffocating. Vance took the lead on the investigation. Within 6 hours, he had his first major break, a frantic 911 call from a local pawn shop owner claiming a man had just tried to sell a vintage, serialized Rolex matching the stolen inventory. The description of the seller was precise, a tall man in a navy blue utility jacket, sporting a faded scar beneath his left eye. Vance didn't waste a single second. He pulled up the DMV database, cross-referencing local residents with that physical description. A profile popped up immediately, Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a quiet, 38-year-old locksmith who lived only 3 blocks away from the crime scene. He had no criminal record, but as Vance looked closer at the file, the pieces began to lock together with terrifying ease. Locksmiths knew security systems. Locksmiths knew how to bypass high-grade safes. And there, staring back at Vance from the driver's license photo, was a thin, faded scar running right beneath Arthur's left eye. "This is our guy," Vance muttered to his partner. What Vance didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have guessed, was that Arthur was currently sitting at his kitchen table, helping his 7-year-old daughter with her math homework. Arthur was a man who lived by a strict routine. He woke up at 5:30 a.m., made coffee, walked his dog, and opened his small locksmith shop by 8 a.m. He was a quiet, unassuming member of the community, the kind of neighbor who shoveled your driveway in the winter without asking for a dime. When the heavy steel door of his apartment was kicked off its hinges, Arthur didn't even have time to stand up. The sheer force of the tactical team rushing his living room threw him to the floor. His daughter's screams echoed off the walls as Vance pinned his boot into Arthur's lower back, pulling his arms behind him with brutal efficiency. "Arthur Pendleton, you are under arrest for armed robbery, assault, and grand larceny," Vance growled, pulling the zip ties tight. "You have the wrong person. I was home. I was asleep." Arthur choked out, his face pressed hard against the linoleum floor. But Vance had heard it all before. Every criminal claimed to be somewhere else. Every guilty man had an alibi. Vance stood up, looking around the modest apartment, his eyes landing on a navy blue utility jacket hanging by the door. He smiled a cold, victorious smile. He had his man. The case was closed, the jewelry would be recovered, and the city would sleep easy tonight knowing the Bloodhound had done his job. At the station, the interrogation was relentless. Vance laid out the evidence like a dealer laying out cards. The locksmith background. The physical match. The navy blue jacket. The scar. Arthur sat under the harsh fluorescent lights, trembling, his voice hoarse from hours of repeating the same truth. He had nothing to do with this. He begged them to check his shop, to check his phone, to check anything that would prove his innocence. But Vance's confirmation bias had already hardened into concrete. He didn't see a terrified father, he saw a calculated actor playing a part to save his own skin. Vance walked out of the room, leaving Arthur alone in the dark, confident that the arrest was flawless. The paperwork was filed, the prosecutor was thrilled, and the local news was already drafting the headlines. But as the heavy steel door locked Arthur inside his cell, a low-ranking IT technician in the city's transit department was settling in for his night shift, completely unaware that he was about to press play on a video file that would tear Officer Vance's perfect career, and the entire department's reputation, completely to shreds. The holding cell was freezing, smelling of industrial bleach and old sweat. Arthur sat on the edge of the metal bench, his head buried in his hands. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his daughter's terrified face as the officers dragged him away. He was a man who had spent his entire life obeying the law, believing that if you did nothing wrong, you had nothing to fear. Now, that belief was completely shattered. He was trapped in a nightmare, and the exit doors were locked from the outside. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Officer Marcus Vance was riding a wave of professional triumph. He had already briefed the chief of police, and the local news was running a segment on the arrest. To the public, it was another textbook victory for the department's top investigator. But in a quiet, dimly lit basement of the Municipal Transit Authority, a young technician named Leo was about to pull a thread that would unravel Vance's entire tapestry of lies and assumptions. Leo's job was simple but incredibly tedious, archiving and reviewing the city's traffic and security camera footage. Because Oak Street was a major commercial hub, the city had recently installed high-definition, multi-angle security cameras at every major intersection. Leo had been instructed to pull the footage from the morning of the heist to assist the prosecution with building their timeline. Leo queued up the footage from camera 14, which overlooked the alleyway directly behind the jewelry store. He hit play. The screen flickered to life, showing the gray, overcast morning of the robbery. At exactly 7:42 a.m., a figure in a navy blue utility jacket appeared on the screen. The man walked with a confident, hurried stride. He carried a heavy canvas duffel bag. Leo zoomed in. The quality of the new cameras was breathtakingly sharp. As the man turned his head toward the street lamp, his profile became crystal clear. The thin, faded scar beneath his left eye was instantly visible. To anyone else, this would have been the final nail in Arthur Pendleton's coffin. It was the suspect, wearing the exact jacket, with the exact physical marker, leaving the scene of the crime. But Leo was a meticulous guy. He didn't just look at the suspect, he looked at the details. He noticed the suspect's hands. The man was wearing heavy leather work gloves, but as he adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, his jacket sleeve pulled back slightly. On his right wrist, there was a very distinct, dark tattoo of a coiled serpent wrapping around an anchor. Leo frowned. He pulled up Arthur Pendleton's mugshot, which had been uploaded to the database just an hour prior. He zoomed in on Arthur's arms. They were completely bare. No tattoos. Not even a freckle. A cold knot began to form in Leo's stomach. He realized he was looking at two completely different men. But the nightmare for the police department was only just beginning. Leo decided to dig deeper. He tracked the suspect's movements backward through the city's camera network, hoping to find where he had come from. At the same time, he decided to do something the arresting officers had completely neglected to do. He decided to verify Arthur's alibi. Arthur had claimed that at the time of the robbery, he was walking his golden retriever in Elmwood Park, a quiet green space 4 miles away from the jewelry store. It seemed like a convenient, unprovable excuse. But Elmwood Park had recently been outfitted with new solar-powered security cameras near the entrance gates. Leo pulled up the feed from the Elmwood Park entrance for Tuesday morning. He fast-forwarded to 7:40 a.m. At exactly 7:41 a.m., the exact minute the robber was caught on camera 14 slicing open the back door of the jewelry store on Oak Street, a man appeared on the Elmwood Park feed. He was wearing a gray fleece pullover and holding a dog leash. Leo zoomed in. The face was unmistakable. It was Arthur Pendleton, casually tossing a tennis ball for his dog. Leo sat back in his chair, the breath completely knocked out of his lungs. He stared at the two screens side by side. On the left monitor, a man with a scar and a serpent tattoo was robbing a jewelry store. On the right monitor, at the exact same second, Arthur Pendleton was 4 miles away, laughing as his dog chased a ball. It was a physical impossibility for Arthur to be in both places at once. The police hadn't just arrested the wrong man. They had arrested a completely innocent father while the real, highly dangerous criminal was still out there, potentially blocks away, laughing at how easily he had framed an innocent locksmith. Leo knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He downloaded the footage onto an encrypted flash drive, grabbed his jacket, and ran out of the building. He knew that if he went through the standard bureaucratic channels, the footage might get lost, buried, or ignored by a department desperate to protect its top detective's reputation. He had to take it directly to the source of the storm. He had to show it to Marcus Vance. The rain had begun to pour by the time Leo slammed his car door in the precinct parking lot. He bolted up the concrete steps, clutching the flash drive tightly in his fist. The desk sergeant tried to stop him, but Leo's frantic energy and city credentials got him past the gate and straight into the bustling bullpen of the robbery homicide division. Officer Marcus Vance was sitting at his desk, a paper cup of stale coffee in one hand, looking over the praise pouring in from the district attorney's office. When Leo burst into his cubicle and slammed the drive onto his desk, Vance didn't look angry, he looked amused. "You're the transit tech, right? If this is the footage for the trial, just leave it in the basket," Vance said, not even looking up. "You need to look at this right now, detective," Leo said, his voice trembling but firm. "You arrested the wrong man. Arthur Pendleton didn't do it." Vance's amusement instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened stare. "Listen to me, kid. We have the suspect's jacket. We have a matching physical description, a matching scar, and a suspect with the exact technical skills required to pull off the heist. Arthur Pendleton is our guy. Don't waste my time." Without another word, Leo reached across the desk, grabbed Vance's mouse, and dragged the video files into the media player. "Just watch." Vance leaned back, crossing his arms, fully prepared to dismiss whatever minor anomaly the technician had found. But as the split-screen footage played, the detective's posture completely froze. On the left side of the screen, the jewelry store thief was cutting through the security system. On the right side, Arthur Pendleton was tossing a ball to his dog in the park. The time stamps on both videos were hard-coded, synchronized to the atomic clock of the city's main mainframe. They were unalterable. Vance's face went pale. The coffee cup in his hand began to shake slightly. He was staring at irrefutable, scientific proof that his ironclad case was a total illusion. But then, the twist became infinitely darker. Vance, using his own seasoned investigative eyes, leaned in closer to the left monitor. He stared at the thief in the navy blue jacket. He studied the way the man walked, the way he carried himself, and the way he held the tools. There was something deeply unsettling about the suspect's movements. They weren't just professional, they were familiar. "Zoom in on the jacket," Vance whispered, his voice suddenly stripped of all its former confidence. Leo manipulated the controls, enhancing the resolution on the thief's navy blue utility jacket. As the image sharpened, Vance noticed a small, distinct tear near the left shoulder seam that had been hastily stitched back together with black thread. Vance's heart stopped. He didn't just recognize the tear. He owned that jacket. Or rather, he used to own it. It was a standard-issue department utility coat given to officers 5 years ago. Vance had donated his old one to a charity drive just 3 weeks prior. A horrifying realization washed over the veteran detective. The scar under the man's eye wasn't real, it was makeup. The jacket wasn't Arthur's, it was Vance's own old coat. The thief hadn't just committed a robbery, he had deliberately constructed a profile that perfectly matched Arthur Pendleton. Knowing that Vance's aggressive, confirmation-biased investigative style would lead him straight to Arthur's door. The entire heist was a setup. The real criminal knew exactly how Marcus Vance operated. He knew the bloodhound would lock onto the first plausible suspect, ignore all counter-evidence, and rush to make an arrest to secure a headline. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a random victim of bad luck, he was a pawn in a highly calculated game designed to humiliate Vance and completely derail the integrity of the police department. Vance stood up so fast his chair rolled backward into the partitions. The room around him, once a symbol of his authority, suddenly felt like a trap closing in. He realized that the pawn shop tip, the perfect description, the timing, it had all been fed to him on a silver platter. And he had swallowed it whole. "Get me the file on the jewelry store owner," Vance barked at his partner, who was watching the exchange in stunned silence. Now. If the real thief had gone to this much trouble to frame an innocent man and manipulate the top detective in the city, then the jewelry store heist wasn't the end of the plan. It was just the opening move. The real target wasn't the diamonds in the safe. The real target was something far more devastating, and the police department had just given the perpetrator a 6-hour head start by chasing a ghost. Vance ran toward the interrogation room where Arthur was still being held, his mind racing through every case he had ever closed. Who hated him this much? Who possessed the intellect to weaponize his own instincts against him? As he threw open the door to the holding area, the heavy scent of ozone and burning plastic hit his nostrils, and the precinct's emergency lights suddenly flashed to life, bathing the concrete corridors in a blinding, rhythmic crimson glow. The crimson glare of the emergency lights pulsed against the concrete walls like a failing heartbeat. The precinct's main servers were crashing in real time, terminal screens cascading into lines of corrupt code. Vance stood in the corridor, the acrid smell of fried circuitry filling his lungs. This wasn't a random glitch. It was a targeted cyber attack, initiated from within the building's own network. The real thief hadn't just framed an innocent man, he had used the chaos of Arthur's arrest to slip a physical Trojan horse right into the heart of police headquarters. Vance. The vault downstairs, his partner shouted over the wail of the sirens. The evidence lockup for the federal cartel case, the electronic seals are dropping. Vance didn't run toward the vault. Instead, he spun on his heel and sprinted back to the IT bullpen where Leo was desperately trying to stabilize the transit feeds. The puzzle pieces in Vance's mind were finally violently crashing together. The serpent tattoo. The stitched jacket. The intimate knowledge of precinct protocols. The person who planned this didn't just know how Vance thought, they had sat across from him for years. Leo. Pull up the internal security feed for the main server room from 10 minutes ago. Vance commanded, slamming his hands onto the desk. The main system is down, detective, I can't access the local drive, Leo stammered, his fingers flying across a backup laptop. But wait, the transit authority has an external diagnostic camera pointing directly at the precinct's rear loading dock. If they use the back exit to tap the fiber line, it will be there. Leo brought up the exterior feed. The rain blurred the lens, but the high-definition sensor cut through the gloom. A figure stepped out of the server room's emergency exit into the dark alleyway, carrying a ruggedized military laptop. The individual stopped under the flickering halogen light to pull up a hood. As they did, their sleeves slid back, revealing the dark, unmistakable ink of a coiled serpent wrapping around an anchor. The suspect turned directly toward the camera, offering a brief, mocking smile before vanishing into the shadows. Vance felt the air leave his lungs. The face on the screen wasn't a career criminal from the streets. It was Captain Thomas Miller, Vance's own mentor, the man who had built the robbery homicide division from the ground up, and the very person who had signed the arrest warrant for Arthur Pendleton just hours earlier. Miller wasn't trying to steal diamonds. The jewelry store heist had been a brilliant, multi-layered distraction. By staging a high-profile robbery that perfectly matched a local locksmith, Miller knew Vance would deploy the entire division's resources to execute a rapid raid and processing. While the precinct was hyper-focused on interrogating Arthur and celebrating their quick victory, Miller had total, unmonitored access to the core server room. His true objective was the federal database holding the identities and locations of every protected witness in the state's largest organized crime syndicate, a file worth millions on the black market. The fake jewelry heist was nothing more than a magician's misdirection, and Arthur was the prop used to keep the audience looking at the wrong hand. He's heading for the train station, Leo said, tracking a GPS anomaly on the transit grid. He's using a clone department badge to bypass the commuter rail security gates. The express train to the international airport leaves in exactly 7 minutes. Vance looked through the glass window of the interrogation room. Arthur was curled up in the corner, holding his head, a completely innocent man whose life had been turned into a weapon of professional destruction. Vance realized that if Miller escaped with that data, the bodies of dozens of witnesses would drop within days, and Arthur would take the fall for a digital heist he didn't even understand. Vance reached down, unclipped his keys, and threw them to his partner. "Release Arthur Pendleton. Give him his jacket. Tell him I'm sorry. And then get him out of this building before it burns down around us." Without waiting for a response, Vance turned and sprinted toward the exit. The rain hit him like cold needles as he breached the street. He didn't take a squad car, the roads were deadlocked by the traffic light failure Miller had triggered. He ran on foot, his lungs burning, pushing past confused pedestrians as the distant roar of the commuter train echoed through the concrete canyons of the city. He had spent 15 years trusting his instincts, proud of his reputation as the bloodhound. Now, he was chasing the man who had trained him, realizing that his own pride had been the perfect lockpick for a master thief. He had less than 4 minutes to reach the platform, and if he failed, the truth would leave the station forever. The concrete stairs of the transit station felt endless as Vance bounded down them 3 at a time. The air below ground was thick with the scent of damp wool and electricity. The digital departure boards were flickering erratically, a final remnant of Miller's digital sabotage. Up ahead, the engines of the airport express train began to roar, the heavy steel doors beginning their slow, mechanical slide shut. Through the crowd of rushing commuters, Vance spotted him. Captain Miller was dressed in a civilian overcoat, his military laptop bag slung securely across his chest. He was just steps away from stepping onto the train and vanishing into anonymity forever. "Miller." Vance's voice cut through the station's din like a siren. The captain stopped. He didn't run. Instead, he slowly turned around, watching his top detective sprint toward him, breathless, drenched in rain, and stripped of all his former arrogance. A cold, patronizing smile touched Miller's lips as Vance pulled his service weapon. His hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "It's over, Thomas," Vance breathed, his weapon trained on his mentor's chest. "I saw the transit feed. I saw the anchor. I know what you did in the server room." Miller didn't reach for a weapon. He looked at the closing train doors, then back at Vance with absolute composure. "You always were a good investigator, Marcus. But your fatal flaw is that you only look where you're told to look. I gave you a perfect script, and you played your part beautifully. If you pull that trigger, you're just a rogue cop shooting his captain in a crowded station. Who do you think the department will believe?" "They don't have to believe me," Vance said, his voice dropping to a calm, resolute whisper. "They just have to look at the external drive I left with the transit authority. The data is already uploaded to a secure federal cloud. The script is broken, Thomas." The confidence in Miller's eyes finally cracked. He glanced at the train, then at the backup officers who were finally flooding down the station stairs behind Vance. Realizing the game was truly up, Miller slowly let the laptop bag slip from his shoulder, letting it crash onto the tiled floor before raising his hands in surrender. 2 hours later, the precinct was quiet. The emergency lights had been turned off, and the standard white fluorescent glare had returned. The sirens were gone, replaced by the hushed, stunned whispers of a department trying to comprehend the betrayal of their highest-ranking officer. Miller was led away in handcuffs, not by the tactical team, but by federal agents. Vance stood in the middle of the empty bullpen. The praise he usually craved after a major arrest felt entirely hollow. His 15-year record of flawless collar metrics meant absolutely nothing now. He walked down the corridor toward the exit, his badge heavy in his pocket, not with the weight of authority, but with the crushing weight of humility. As he stepped out onto the front steps of the precinct, the rain had stopped. The morning sun was breaking through the gray clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete plaza. Waiting at the bottom of the steps, holding his daughter's hand, was Arthur Pendleton. Arthur's clothes were still wrinkled from the holding cell. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked up as the detective approached. A tense, suffocating silence fell between the two men. Vance's partner stepped forward to intervene, but Vance held up a hand, stopping him. The decorated detective walked down the steps until he was standing eye to eye with the man he had unjustly thrown to the ground just hours before. Vance looked at Arthur, then down at the little girl who was clinging tightly to her father's jacket, her eyes still wide with fear. Vance slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out his gold detective's shield, and held it out in his palm. "I spent my entire life believing this badge made me infallible," Vance said, his voice raw with genuine emotion. "I thought my job was to catch monsters, but I forgot that my real job was to protect people. I allowed my pride to blind me, and because of that, I tore your family apart. There are no excuses for what I did to you today." Arthur looked at the gold shield, then up at Vance's face. He didn't take the badge. Instead, he took a deep, shaky breath, adjusting his grip on his daughter's hand. "My daughter spent the night wondering if her father was a criminal," Arthur said quietly, his voice trembling. "You didn't just lock me in a cell, detective. You took away her sense of safety. You can't undo that with an apology." "I know," Vance replied, meeting Arthur's gaze directly, refusing to hide from the candor of the moment. "But I will spend the rest of my career working to earn back the trust one broke today. Starting right now." Arthur looked at the detective for a long, quiet moment. Seeing the genuine remorse in the older man's eyes, he gave a single, solemn nod, not a full forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of a shared, painful truth. He turned and walked away into the morning light, his daughter walking safely by his side. Vance watched them go until they disappeared around the corner. He looked down at the badge in his hand, understanding that the true test of a police officer wasn't how many cases he closed, but his willingness to seek the truth, even when that truth revealed his own profound failures.